Welcome to Insights in Sound, where we talk to the people behind the scenes, behind the technology, and behind the music. People you may not know, but you should. And please check out insightsinsound.com for a full list of our podcasts and YouTube series.
My guest is Leslie Ann Jones. She is Director of Music Recording and Scoring here at Skywalker Ranch.
Skywalker Sound.
Skywalker Sound. It's no longer just a ranch. This place has been around for quite a while.
Yeah, since mid-'80s.
And when did you join in the 90s, right?
97, yeah.
I want to get into a little bit of your background. It's worth acknowledging that your parents were Spike Jones and
Helen Greco.
And she was a singer, and Spike was, of course, a composer. And the only reason I bring that up is because it's always interesting to me how people who have grown up in a celebrity home, sometimes they completely eschew the exposure. Sometimes it tends to, they have a kind of a love-hate relationship with it. How was that for you?
Well, I suppose I'm more of the eschew person, you know. I mean, being raised in Beverly Hills, I now live in Oakland. That should give you some idea of kind of where my direction veered somewhere.
Get me the hell out of this, right?
Yeah. Most people don't consider my father as much a composer as a band leader. I would think if you looked at, not to get in the weeds, but if you look at composing in terms of arrangement and concept, then that would be true. But he made a career out of making fun of the standards of the day, and so those were composed by someone else.
I have the impression that if nothing else, his sense of humor rubbed off on you.
Yes, that is true. Yeah, his sense of humor. My mother's singing, of course.
But I'm curious as to how this impacted you growing up. I mean, what was your musical background? Did you choose music? Did it choose you? You know, and then how did the exposure to this, not just music, but the business, how did that influence your own upbringing as a musician and then as an engineer?
Golly, I really never expected to kind of be in the business. But my father passed away when I was 13, and I ended up getting an electric guitar. And started playing, and then I didn't form it, but sort of a band grew out of my relationship with my cousins. And one of my cousins, Tony Greco Jr., was a wonderful songwriter. And so we started performing when I was in my teens.
Oh, wow.
And, you know, still never with a thought of, I don't know, making a career out of it, but we were having a lot of fun, and
you were a rocker at a garage band, basically.
Yeah, and it was in the 70s during the heyday of the Sunset Strip, and
of course,
the
it's what you do, basically.
The Troubadour and the hullabaloo and the whiskey and all of that.
Oh my gosh!
And then we ended up we recorded a lot, but nothing ever came out. And but I was exposed to great musicians. I was exposed to great musicians in my father's band.
Sure.
And then, of course, the people that played on our records included members of the Wrecking Crew. And I don't know, then we stopped, and then I joined an all-female rock band, and
Which one?
It's just
Okay.
Not anybody.
There were
would
a lot
know.
of really great all-female rock bands, especially in San Francisco area at that time.
Yeah, this was in LA. It was a group called Sarsaparilla. It was a rock band. And we toured and played clubs. It was a top 40 band, and I had bought the sound system for the band, and when the band broke up, I kind of inherited the sound system and then started doing sound for other bands. And you know, when you grow up with great players like that, when you're self-taught, you realize you kind of, yeah, you're never going to get there. You're never going to get to be the kind of player that you admire. And I was just very lucky that I found sound, as it were, and started down that path. And I was doing vocal arrangements for different groups and had a music publishing company when I was younger. And you know, at one point I was managing artists. And
So you grazed, basically.
yeah,
You dabbled.
yeah. And
Yeah.
eventually I was in LA working for ABC Records in the publicity department, and I asked for a job at the recording studio, never thinking I was going to be a full-time recording engineer. But I wanted to be a producer and a manager, and I thought I should learn a little about recording engineering, and that was in the early 70s.
So now you had no actual formal music training at all.
None.
Uh-huh. But one thing that does strike me is that obviously being exposed to especially big band music, you had an exposure early on to ensemble playing,
Yes.
which I think that is huge. And unfortunately, that's something that a lot of younger people don't have the opportunity for. But I think understanding that energy between the players,
Yes.
that's formative.
Yeah, and I think that really ultimately affected the way I listen to music, the way
course.
I relate to musicians. And also, for me, it doesn't really matter what kind of music it is, because there's that interplay.
Right.
There's that orchestration. It could be a rock band and there's still orchestration in terms of who's playing what.
Absolutely.
And so all of that has informed my career to a great extent. I've never had the kind of career or been the kind of engineer where I'm, you know, getting files from people where the guitar player recorded and then the drummer recorded, and you know, and then I have to put all that together. I'm very lucky in that I get, for the most part, everybody in the same room at the same time. And if I don't like the way the snare drum sounds, I can change it right there without having to deal with the fact that it's coming in after the fact. Then, oh gee, if the drummer had only heard the bass player or the guitar player, they might have played a different style, or you know. So I'm just very lucky.
Yeah. That's, I mean, to me, that's the epitome of the magic of making music together, is that interplay between them. So, yeah, I would agree with you.
And that does, you know, don't get me wrong, that kind of style of modern music and modern recording works really, really well for some people.
Absolutely.
And you know,
and some genres.
and some genres, but it just has never really fit with what I've done.
Again, some people, you know, for example, you do a lot of film score work. You know, some people do, especially nowadays, there's a lot of loop-based kind of composition and stuff like that going on. But yeah, I think you're right. I think a lot of the approach of the organic approach has definitely influenced, and it, you know, it's influenced most of us of that generation, I guess. But it's, you know, and I don't want to be, you know, just, you know, yelling at clouds and get off my lawn and stuff like that. But I think there is really an aspect of making music that's so valuable too. And
It is.
cutting your teeth on that, I think, really, it influences the way one perceives music. And I think that makes you a better
Yes.
mixer.
I think so. Yeah.
So I'm curious as to, I'm always fascinated by people who start out as musicians and then veer off to the left brain, you know, and I'm curious as to where that split happened for you. Was it just, as you say, that you just felt like you would never be virtuoso enough for
Yeah.
your own good, really?
Yeah. You know, I knew I would never be the kind of musician I admired.
Uh-huh.
And, but when I started doing sound, I really felt like I could kind of get in at the beginning and learn about that. And I was reading, nonstop. And at that time, of course, there were still hi-fi and stereo magazines.
Yeah.
And I was able to learn terminology and things like that that were not only applicable to home audio and hi-fi and stereo, but were applicable to recording as well. Signal to noise, total harmonic distortion,
Sure.
amps, volts, things like that.
Right.
That
Geek speak.
because when I started, there were really no recording schools. There were broadcast schools
Yep.
that were teaching radio technology.
I went to one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
First class FCC license.
yeah,
Mhm.
and San Francisco State was a great example of that. Eventually, that morphed into a recording program.
Sure.
But when I started out, there were none. So you really had to be self-taught and have the initiative. And I owned a PA company with a couple of friends of mine, so we were mixing sound for other people, and I was learning that way. So it really did kind of evolve it into that. But I've come to realize really everything I've done in my life, I've been self-taught.
That is something that you and I both share and a number of other people, and I think it's, there's good and bad to that. Obviously, the challenges of that is that you learn everything in a vacuum. And then later on you figure out, am I doing it right? And
Well, that's why finally I did go, there was an experimental college in LA called Sherwood Oaks Experimental College.
Sure.
They had screenwriting courses, producing and directing courses, things like that. And they added a beginning and an advanced recording engineering course. And I thought, well, I'm going to take that exactly for that reason, because I want to find out if I really know what I'm doing, and
Yep.
if I don't,
Yep.
somebody that I can ask questions of. And ironically, the person that was teaching those classes, Bill Halverson, had been a recording engineer on some of the records I had done with my cousins. So that was a very interesting and a very good thing to do. And I have done that at several points in my career. When I was working at Capitol and we started doing much more film scoring and TV scoring, there's a whole different language to that. And I decided if I wanted to be an effective collaborator in that kind of work, that I needed to know more about that. And UCLA had an extension course on film sound from beginning to end.
I remember that.
And I took that course, and it made me much more confident than speaking the kind of language that one needs to do film scoring and TV scoring, And also to not make people feel like they were coming into a traditional pop recording studio as opposed to a film scoring stage, where, and I think that that's important as well, to make the clients feel comfortable, like they're not having to walk in and show you everything about that particular style of recording.
Well, and you bring up a bigger point, which is the whole idea of learning to, shall we say, speak the language, read the room, work with a lot of different clients. There are recording schools now, as you say, and
Of course, everywhere.
But one thing that's still lacking is learning the psychology, learning when to be invisible, learning not only when to contribute, but how to contribute, because the creative process is so fragile in that sense.
Yeah.
And I think that etiquette, that's something you only learn by doing.
And also, you learn by doing, but also I think you learn by, frankly, I don't know how somebody would learn that now. When I was getting started, of course, you had various levels that you grew into as your
Right.
experience was better and as people gave you more responsibility, and if you raised your hand because you wanted more responsibility. So, you got really good at making tape copies and showing up on time and working your shift, and then you all of a sudden became an assistant engineer
But
and
also, you could look over the shoulder of these people and
yes,
watch
yes,
how they
right,
handled these
right.
situations.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's that, but also, I was lucky enough to be in situations like at Capitol where you would go one day from being an assistant engineer to the next day being the engineer.
Yeah.
And there's a different way you have to be
Yes.
in one role versus the other role. And learning that is a real art, because in one you're totally in a supportive situation, and in the other one you are still in a supportive situation, but you have much more control over things, much more interaction with the producer, the artist, all of that,
And more responsibility.
and more responsibility. But to be able to go back and forth was a wonderful lesson, really,
Yeah, I can imagine.
in how to kind of just, change your stripes and, know kind of what's expected of you and what you can expect for yourself.
Now, technology obviously has evolved during all of these different gigs that you're getting, right? You're going from basically 2-inch analog to eventually all digital, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, that changes the creative process too. Did that change the way you worked with people at all?
Well, I mean, I suppose it did change the way I worked with people in that it, because of digital technology and particularly, the advent of Tascam and ADAT,
Yeah.
people being able to record more at home and also be able to record more tracks in a less expensive way. It was a very much of an enabler in terms of really, I don't want to say lowering the bar in a bad way, but it opened up
Yeah. Gaining
recording,
entry. Yeah.
and it opened up it made the barrier for entry less
Yeah.
for people to come in. But that also meant that those people, there were fewer gatekeepers. So the expectation that somebody would walk in the studio that was a really good player, had really good instruments, and kind of were ready to record was quite a bit different then.
Yeah, yeah. And that, I think, is another point that you touched on here, which is that because we don't have to commit, there's a lot less committing, and then there's a lot more decision making later on and everything. And I think that affects the whole creative flow in the studio. So the idea that we don't have to get it right on this one take because we don't only have the one track to work with, or I can't give you 15 tracks to overdub on. I can't give you unlimited vocals and then I'll sit and comp it later on or something like that. I think that doesn't that change the way you interact with musicians? And do you then push them to try and bring more of an A game?
Well, I think for the projects I produce, I still have the mindset that you're there in the studio, and there's a certain level of expectation in terms of your proficiency as a player. I mean, having said that, it's always the client's money, but I also know how hard it is for people to come to Skywalker. I mean, it's hard to get here. First of all, we're off the beaten path. We have lots of big name clients with big budgets, but we also have clients that have taken out a second mortgage to be able to afford to make a record. Some clients that have fundraised, that have patrons that allow them to come and record. So it doesn't really matter to me how you get here. Everyone's really treated the same way, and it's up to us to have the same respect for their initiative and thinking that this is what they want to do. Having said that, my job really, whether I'm producing or engineering, is to be the enabler, you know, to let whatever they're trying to do find its way in the best way possible, so that what comes out of the speakers is representative of what they can do. Yeah, sometimes it's frustrating if somebody's not a great player or doesn't have great compositions, but they want to make a record, you know. And I think that I ended up starting producing more because as an engineer, a lot of clients didn't have a producer. So as the engineer, I was, you know, telling them about doing new takes, or, you know, whether the intonation wasn't right, or, you know, giving them suggestions, you know.
Oh, you fall into that role, especially if there isn't a producer. You also fall into the psychologist's role, and, you know, as you say, the enabler. And I think that's kind of the crux of my question is, you know, when you're confronted with that, I guess it's almost harder now to convince people that they should give it their all, because it's, oh, I got another track.
Yeah.
You know, let's do another one.
You know, there is a benefit to that. And the benefit, of course, is if as a producer I'm going for a certain performance from someone and they don't quite get it, that I can work with them on that and ultimately get the performance that I'm looking for the particular project, as opposed to them having one shot at it. Of course, the downside is for those people that aren't able to take that kind of direction and mold what they're doing to fit that, then they're just making the same mistakes every time, or they think, oh, well, I've got another track, or, you know, can't you cut that together to make it happen? Well, you know, my job is not to create your performance for you. My job is to press record and you perform. Having said that, I often end up creating the performance.
Of course, yeah. Yeah, it's a balancing act, I think, you know, and I love what digital technology has done for us on a creative level, and I loathe it at the same time because of that, because it really has kind of taken some of the urgency out of it, I think.
I would say I've always kept my analog mentality, even though I'm recording digitally. So I'm always trying to get the balance correct while I'm recording, not waiting until the end, not waiting until it's mixed. Because then I can deal with the sound of things. If you know, a particular instrument isn't blending in the way it should, sure, I could fix it later. But I've also learned from doing a lot of classical music that it's important that the musicians come into the control room and hear their balance and hear their sound, because that affects how they're playing in terms of their dynamics, in terms of their touch, and all of that. So if they come in and I have to turn something up in order for them to hear it, then I'm not doing my job, you know? I record solos louder than I record sections. So I can step away from the console, go get a cup of coffee, and somebody has a solo and it's louder. You know, I mean, that comes from a lot of analog recording.
Tracking for the mix, as we say. Yeah. Which makes a whole lot of sense. I mean, coming from those roots, you would do that. So let's pop over to another topic. You've done a hell of a lot for women in the industry coming up. Did you even realize early on that you were, I mean, what you were up against? I mean, when you first started working, because I have the impression that you have always been sort of capable of the ideal is always gender agnostic, right? You know, I have no, you're not a female engineer any more than I'm a male engineer. We're just engineers. This is the kind of mentality that you seem to have always had. Has that helped you sort of navigate some of this crap?
Being agnostic about it?
Yeah, being almost, you know, just making sure that your qualifications led in that sense.
Well, yes, I guess so. I mean, but no more so than not telling people who my parents were, you know.
Oh, fair point. Yeah.
You know, I mean, I think I didn't want anyone to have an expectation of my work ethic or my background or you know, how I was going to be based on the fact that either they thought I grew up with a silver spoon or my parents were in the business or anything like that. And, you know, I was well aware that there were few, if any, women doing what I was doing. And, but I just really didn't think about it. I tried not to think about it and just do the best job that I could. And I'm a very inquisitive person anyway, so I was constantly learning and asking questions and trying to find out more, because I don't have an electronics background at all. You know, I have a music background. And so, you know, there were things that I think were perhaps more difficult for me, not because I was a woman, but because my background was from music, not from electronics, not from broadcast, and
because you were self-taught.
And because I was self-taught, so it was a continual learning experience for me. And I also, I think, I realized what my limitations were as well. So if I had to move a piano for a tracking session, I would ask for help. You know, it's not like, oh, I can do this myself. You know, I mean, really, what's the point? You know, I don't have to prove that I can move a piano. Yeah, I just, you know, you just do what you do. And, you know, women, I think, tend to, you know, stereotypes exist for a reason, I'll say
Absolutely.
that. I think women tend to have a bit more of a service attitude and perhaps a less of a goal. I have to sit in that chair, you know. You know, I want his job. You know, I never had that.
Well, the other thing that I think, you know, if we're going to talk stereotypes, I think women also have sort of a more, I don't want to call it nurturing because it's not that, but it's more, as you say, it's more, when you say service attitude, it's more just being in tune with certain psychological aspects of what's going on, whereas stereotypically speaking, men tend to be more 30,000 feet. And
yeah, but you know, I think that also has been a hindrance for us because women can be really fantastic assistant engineers, and it's really difficult to make that leap from being an assistant and being in a more service role, and then it is sitting in the big chair and being in control. And I certainly think now that everybody's just doing everything themselves, there is not that kind of leap that has to happen, although I do think women are still having a hell of a time getting, you know, great projects and, you know, the kind of real legacy sort of, you know, and important work that a lot of our male friends are. But but I do think that, yeah, I just, I didn't think about it. In many cases, I was the first female engineer that particular studio had hired. When I went to Capitol, I was the second, so that was good. But yeah, I just, tried to do the best job that I could.
You were just talking about the idea of doing these, being the first. Carrie Keyes, who I think you probably know. Carrie,
Yeah.
and Carrie was one of the founders of Sound
Sound
Girls. And, she mentioned something that I thought was also interesting. She said, it was almost easier back then because there weren't these defined roles, and it was like whoever could show up and do the job,
Yeah.
you were kind of welcomed,
Right. I think that in my position, until I really sort of made a name for myself or whatever that's worth, there were always low expectations. And so it wasn't too difficult to exceed the low expectations.
When you say low expectations, do you mean just of women or of people in general?
No, well, I can't generalize and say it's low expectations of women. I can say that I'd be sitting in the control room and a client would walk in saying, "Who's my engineer?" And I would say, it's me, and they'd sort of roll their eyes and go, "Okay." And 10 minutes into a drum sound, I could do no wrong.
Right.
So I benefited from low expectations. I benefited from people not perhaps questioning whether, I was up to the task. And, because of, I think, other things I brought into the room, my own talents and my own personality, my sense of humor, all of those things, I think helped.
Yeah, well, that's the job, as you say, yeah. So I know you've done a lot for organizations like Women's Audio Mission and Sound Girls, and I know that things have gotten a little bit better in terms of the odds for women in the industry, but I think it's still it's almost harder now because even though there are more women, there are fewer positions in general.
Yeah.
So and then, as you say, just the learning by doing. Is there anything that you see on the horizon in terms of opportunities for young people in general coming in? And this actually it's a great way to wrap, because I usually do conclude with this question, and in your case it's very applicable. Since the industry has changed so much, the way we make music has changed so much, as we just discussed. Even the way music sells now, completely different world.
Yes.
What do you tell 15-year-old you coming in now?
It's funny. I was having that conversation with the producer of the project that I just started today, because he works for a small label, and it's like, well, how do you even measure success now?
Exactly.
Is it you can't do it by physical copies? Do you do it by streams? Do you do it by how many people are, how many subscribers
Social
you
media,
have? I mean,
yeah.
What is success anymore? And not only that, but how do you find and maintain lasting success where you're not just the flavor of the month? And I think, yes, there are many more intentional opportunities for women, given She Is the Music, we are moving the needle. Wham, of course, has been at the forefront of that.
Terry is just nonstop. Oh
Yeah,
my God.
Institute for the Musical Arts. I think the most important thing is for girls and young women just to not let their, fear of what they don't know be a hindrance. But, it should really be an entry into learning more and being okay. I mean, I I still don't know everything. I mean, who does? And
But the
there's
younger you are, the more you think you know.
yeah,
you know?
exactly.
Yeah.
The younger you are, the more you think you know, and yet there's a lot of, I would ask, you know, why something works the way it does, not just what it does, I mean, slapping a compressor on everything just because you don't know how to record, that's not the answer. The answer is learn how to record so that you don't have to slap a compressor on everything, But do that by asking questions, by staying after school. If you go to a workshop or a panel discussion, sit in the front row, raise your hand, ask questions. Some of that involves a certain amount of assertion, on your part. And because you don't get anything without asking for it.
That's a good point, yeah. And what about also, I think, the idea of being just flexible in terms of your goal? Because again, when you're younger, you have this very kind of clear goal of this is what I'm going to do. And then, we end up taking all of these different paths that just kind of, certain doors open, others close and redirect. And I think it's also important to be able to just entertain the idea that, oh, well, maybe I'll try something different. I mean, obviously that's the case in your career. You've been all over the map in certain ways.
Yeah, I think it's a little different, though, than I think it's more about being open to different opportunities and not being so. I mean, I can only point to myself about coming to the realization I was never going to be Lee Ritenour. I was never going to be, any of the great guitar players that I admired. I could copy every Stephen Stills guitar solo, but what did that matter? I couldn't come up with a solo myself.
Right.
So I was lucky in that I found something else that allowed me to still be a part of that without actually being that person. Having said that, I've had lots of opportunities in my career that have challenged me and that I thought, geez, I'm not really sure I know how to do that, but I'm going to do it because I really like the people I'm involved. I'm going to learn something and I'll figure out some way. There are lots of things that one can do in our business that is not just sitting in the big chair, being the producer, being the engineer, making the beats, all of that, and you don't have to do everything. You just have to be willing to kind of accept what might come your way. Even if it doesn't turn into anything, at least you're getting more experience.
As you said earlier, just saying yes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Opens a lot of doors.
It does.
Yeah. That's great advice. Leslie Ann Jones, thank you so much for being my guest.
Well, you're very welcome. Thanks.
It has
Thanks
been
for
a
coming.
pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Hey, I'm Daniel Keller. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join us each week for Insights in Sound.